Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Wow, the past 24 hours were incredible. It seems that after the calm in the winter, we just had everything in around Ukraine just exploding with news that would any other day would take a headline on its own. So watch until the end today. It's going to be very, very important. And if we're talking about explosions, we must talk about the first and I think one of the loudest topics of today. Okay, I'm going to stop with the explosion puns, but it's the sinking of another Russian vessel in the lake Donuslav, which is located right over here in Crimea. There was a missile carrier, the anti-ship missile carrier. Ukraine has encountered it before on a receiving end when it struck Odessa harbor and it damaged some of the grain ships, if you remember that event. And it was located in this lake for a good reason, because there is only one narrow part on entry. So the big question was that we know that Russians are not very smart, but I'm pretty sure you understand why the ship was here. You don't need to be like 10 feet tall, if that can be said about the brain, to understand why it was here, because there was just a narrow entry and it would be clear to guard it. So these drones were able to make it somehow into the inside territory. Now, I'm pretty sure for Russians, it's going to be a whole investigation how it got there. I have my ideas. I think it was a special operation by the Ukrainians that may or may not involve certain land movements, but I will I cannot speculate just because I have nothing to substantiate it with. But what is interesting is that this attack with, firstly, a lot of drones. This time we didn't see there was just one or two drones attacking the ship. We saw there was like a lot of drones, or it was just edited really nicely where we thought that it was a lot of drones. But this is what I was telling you before, that as Ukraine is using these naval drones, imagine what would happen if Ukraine would use like 5, 10, 15 of these drones at the same time. Because the price of the ship, like some people say, well, the price of the ship is about 50 to 60 million, right? But it's a replacement cost if you would build that ship. Russia has no capabilities or infrastructure to build this kind of ship inside of the territory of the Black Sea. So it's not the same as just putting a price tag on it. The lost time of using and of capabilities of this ship is priceless. So that is the most important thing. But again, the attack was not only carried out by the drones themselves, the attack also was carried out by Ukrainians striking the territory of Crimea with drones and with missiles. There has been some speculation that it was potentially the ground-launched small diameter bombs that just arrived to Ukraine launched, but we don't know about that. We're going to talk about these a little bit later. And what happened is that Ukraine they struck the anti-air assets of Russians in Crimea. Then they struck the Belbek airport near the Sevastopol. I believe it's somewhere here in the area. And after that, the naval videos apparently appeared. So it was a massive combined effort. My theory is that aviation is the biggest problem for the naval drones. One of the biggest counters that Russians have against these surface drones, naval ones, is that they would use planes or helicopters to protect the ships from, because planes and helicopters specifically, they have both night vision, they have a really good angle of attack, and they are very efficient at destroying these drones. Whereas you can see if there is a lot of drones, then the ship itself, even if it has the ability to defend itself, it just fails at this. It just cannot do it. So now we have Russian fleet. It's about 20% of Russian fleet that has been already sunk by Ukrainians. And it's a significant damage. Remember, this is against a country with no fleet at all. The most important thing here is not the fleet is being sunk, is that it's being disrupted as a cohesive unit. So the more damage Ukraine deals, the less they're able to work as a cohesive force, and more importantly, they will be less and less there will be less and less influence on the naval component in Ukraine. So they will be able to do more landing operations, more scouting, more planes will be able to fly over the sea. It's a great success for Ukraine. I'm really happy that they're continuing doing it. And if we're talking about this strike on the Baalbek airfield, there are reports that there were 2 planes that got damaged by the strike. It's again not completely confirmed, but the Russians were crying about this, so which is great news. So we potentially can add additional couple of planes that Ukraine destroyed on the ground. Before I continue next, a lot of the material that I'm using here, especially English translation, comes from Dimitri at War Translated on Twitter. So if you can, please go to Dimitri, show him some love, if you're using the shitter, of course, because I'm using his materials a lot and I just want to make a shout out for that. But if we're talking about how the situation is developing further for Russians, it's not only Crimea that they're having troubles with, it's also Avdiivka direction. Remember this salient that they have developed so much. And I told you that, it's not actually that great. Russians themselves are not very happy because they were able to get this salient not because they pushed Ukrainians out of their defensive positions like in an honest battle, but because they used military tactics, tunnels, they were able to get in this area of so-called Tsarska Okhota, and then they got essentially in a very, very advanced forward position, and now they're being assaulted by Ukrainians from all sides, and they're not having a good time. And this is exactly what the Russians are reporting here. They are stating, again, you can pause and read this, both this message and the second message as well, where they're talking about how actually bad the situation is with them attacking, and they are saying that it's actually not looking good, and the advances for them going forward into Avdiivka is becoming more and more complicated. They do say that Ukrainians don't have enough artillery, but the drones are helping a lot. The FPV drones are really stopping Russians right now. And FPV drones is also the name of the game for the next story, which Russians right now are absolutely seething about. And it happened with Russians in the area of Novomikhailivka, which is right over here. It was an absolute catastrophe, disaster. There is a video of that, again, in the Discord. Check it out. And oh my God. So here the column, like a huge column over 12 vehicles for sure, of Russians just kind of driving down the road and then just get completely obliterated by the FPV drones. No chance. Absolutely destroyed. Ukraine sustained no casualties except for drones that exploded, and it was a carnage for Russians, and they are not happy about it. Like, this is just one of the message, but like every single Z channel was again saying that we don't learn, everything is bad, why there are so many idiots. And the point that I want to make with this is that Russians, while we see them using certain strategies, like tactics, like special tactics especially, we see that in general, they are still fighting very predictably. They're not adapting fast enough. And again, Russia is really long. Their army is just huge. It's incredible what Ukraine can do with the limited resources that they have. So when we're talking about why we are still kind of like, if Russian army is so weak, why Ukraine still haven't won, is because if there would be any other competent army with the resources that Russia has, Ukraine would stand no chance. But because Russians have no adaptability, because they just cannot do it, we're getting these the same time. They complain about how bad everything is, and I'm going to guarantee you a month or so, or maybe even a week later, we're going to see another video of another Russian column just getting obliterated in exactly the same way. it's gonna be glorious. So while Russian army is long, it's not infinite. Just recently, Madjar, which is like a famous drone group operator, like a commander, he was been reporting that just around the area of Krinky, in just a recent time, they've burned over 300 armored vehicles. Just one direction in the battlefield, over 300 vehicles. It's enormous. The losses that Russia is sustaining is just incredible. And we're not the only one talking about this. Budanov has also came out in public. He gave a couple of interviews, some to the Ukrainian sources, some to the more Western-leaning sources. He talked about the prospects of having Trump as a president. You can watch it. It's on CNN somewhere. But the most important here that I want to pay specific attention, because again, I'm hearing the media picking up a certain story which is not there. People are saying that Budanov is promising another counteroffensive. That is not what he's saying. He said that right now Russia is in active phase. They're attacking, but they're not achieving their goal. He's saying that by the spring, by the mid-spring, they will be completely out of strength, and that then it's going to be Ukrainian turn and ability, like a turn to do something, to be active. He did not say that there is going to be another counteroffensive. He's just going to say that there's going to be a window of opportunity that Ukraine will try to exploit to the best of their abilities. And if we're talking about abilities, I cannot skip the GSDB that finally arrived to Ukraine. The ground launch small diameter bombs are extremely important for Ukraine. They are essentially the aviation bombs that would glide with the GPS, with the like smart tracking that would be able to track moving targets. They would be normally launched from the plane, but then Boeing had a genius idea. Hey, we have all of these old boosters that we used for HIMARS. Why don't we put the booster, like these bombs that you would launch from a plane, on top of the boosters? Then the boosters would launch them in the air, and then these bombs would just separate and kind of glide into the enemy territory, and you would get relatively cheap, because the bomb itself and technology is relatively known and cheap, and reuse the boosters that the US just have, because they're older boosters and there was no need for them. And there's like thousands of them, so it's there is a potential for having a lot of these small diameter ground launched bombs. This is going to be great addition for Ukraine. It's a 150 kilometer ranged ammunition, and this thing is specifically why there are rumors that current strikes in Crimea are already ongoing together by using these bombs, because Ukraine right now, as we're speaking, there are reports that Ukraine is bombing targets in Crimea right now. So these bombs are going to be big boon for Ukraine. We'll see if they actually can attack the moving vehicles. That would be huge if Ukraine would be able to track, like for example, target certain trains or anything else. Huge, 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 huge. And Russia is not having a good time, because Ukraine, while it's all like, remember, Ukraine is right now in economy mode, right? They need to make use of everything that they have. And one of the major shifts that we saw Ukraine did in January is they shifted to attacking oil facilities, specifically like targets around St. Petersburg, around the south of Russia, and so on and so on. And they're continuing these targets. Every day we're hearing, oh, certain oil processing facility has been struck in Russia. Oh, certain refinery has been struck in Russia. And Ukraine is doing, and it brings results. As you can see, in January, Russia already has reported like that the exports of petrol and diesel have dropped by 37 and 23% respectively. A quarter at least was cut, almost a quarter, 23% was cut down of exports of oil. Massive bonus. Remember, this is Russia's main income source. I told you that the Russian budget that the Putin and everyone else set in for this year is dependent on whether the sanctions will work, whether Russia will be able to get their profits from the oils, and from the other energy sources that they're selling. And there are ways that they're doing it. For example, Turkey is helping a lot with them. So they are essentially buying Russian gas. They're mixing the Russian gas, like liquefying the Russian gas together with their own gas from other sources, and then it already is not a Russian gas, because then it's a mixed product, and that's way how they're selling it. So there is ways how Russia is still doing certain things, but all of these are partial schemes. The point is not like it would be ideal to cut it off completely. I understand. But every little bit help, every single percentage of drop of Russian export over here means Russia gets less money, it can build less tanks, it can buy less weapons, it can just get less development, which will allow Ukraine to go forward. So another thing that is important for Ukraine to go forward is support from EU and US. And EU is stepping up majorly. Firstly, I want to address my US viewers. Some of you I know are like supporter of Trump's, and some of you, especially like on a like a more fringe edges of the political spectrum, you're saying that Europe needs to step up. Well, firstly, Europe has been stepping up massively. By this point, European Union has been, and also other countries in Europe. Like I must say it very clearly, because UK has also been helping in other countries. Norway is also not part of European Union, but still. But other countries in Europe have been stepping up massively. And if you accumulate what has been contributed by the European countries, even just weaponry is already, like in weaponry itself, is already edging close to what US has been provided. If you add the financing for programs for refugees, to give money for finance people in Ukraine, just humanitarian aid and so on, then it's way above of what US has been stating. So please, I'm going to ask you to dial down. The EU needs to step up. That train has been a little bit, that ship sailed a little bit. And especially, we just recently got reports that Germany finally got 2% of GDP assigned to defense. The NATO target that they were supposed to do is finally there. It is achieved by Germany. Good job, Germany. Let's continue on like that. But 50 billion euros were signed by the European Union, and Hungary was put in the place. So Orban came out with, we know, specific domain. This was the kind of consolidated effort. There was a big push from Ukrainian side to try to offer something to appease Hungarians, like to give them like a bone to pick on, try to help them with minority of Hungarians that are living inside of Ukraine. They specifically want the Hungarian minority not to study in Ukraine, which is a bullshit request. We know that, but the point is that Ukraine right now is fighting for survival. It's a question for later. So they need this money. So they were trying to do. But the European Union themselves has also pushed back on Orban significantly. There were two big motions that were put forward against Orban. He was basically said, like, we the 26 countries are taking it extremely seriously. So what we will do is going to try to push for the Article 7 to make sure Hungary does not get the voting rights in the EU anymore. And secondly, the push was to get Hungary to not receive any EU funding for any programs at all, which essentially means if you're in EU and you are not getting the right to vote and you're not benefiting from the EU programs, are you in the EU actually? Like, so the countries cannot be excluded forcefully from EU. That's not how the union works. But if you're not getting all of that, you're not getting the benefits. And we know that European programs is a huge corruption source for a lot of the people. Like, this is kind of like whenever I hear about corruption in Ukraine, tell me about the appropriation of EU funds and like in any country, and then we can talk about corruption. So Orban was basically put to this, like, we're going to cut everything. Your economy, which is not a very good economy. Orban is not the smartest economic guy, and his economy is not specifically booming. The Florent reacted, the Hungarian currency reacted to all of these news very, very rapidly. It was like, oh, nope, 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 really bad news. So Orban said that, okay, we can accept it if every year we can review the cycle and so on. So after negotiations, the review was implemented, but the review will be happening not every 1 year, but every 2 years. And obviously what Orban pushed for is like, I need you to have and play this game with me every year, so I will have veto right every year for the next 5 years while this budget will be running for Ukraine. Instead, it's going to be a review after 2 years, which is going to be reviewed by the Commission, and Hungary, like, there will be no veto rights to stop this. There is going to be only a review, maybe for adjustments or something else. But there is not going to be a veto right to stop it. That's the important part. So major, massive, like a big dick move by EU, finally showing teeth, finally putting the authoritarian leaders inside of Europe to their place. More of this, please, and harder. Yes, go European Union. And if we're talking about Germany, like to round it all up, one of the interesting news, which I probably will cover in some other video, but it's an interesting read and I will recommend you reading this. But with surprise to absolutely no one, a far-right party representative from Germany was working with an FSB agents to stop the help for Ukraine. They were on purpose delaying any kind of decisions by Germany to help the Ukraine. So the guy was caught red-handed, and it's a fascinating story which we definitely need to look at some other time. Thank you so much for watching this, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this, because I was really trying to pack all of these major news, and it seems that they're not stopping. There is already reports that something, supposedly a ship, is burning south of Crimea. Nothing is stopping. Things are happening. Ukraine is now receiving the funds. It's not enough for it to prevail, but it's definitely going to make sure that Ukraine can still hold on, and maybe US will finally unfuck themselves and help democracy prevail. I love you all. Slava Ukraini. Trust in the armed forces. I'll see you next time.